I focus on so many issues. I know I do. I focus on the law, the legal issues, and the domestic issues in China. But I also try to stay on top of what's happening geopolitically, because China takes its cues from that, and we can see whether or not China's power is increasing or decreasing according to what's happening beyond China's borders. Here, in this article, I wrote about the suicide bomber that killed the Confucius Institute workers in Karachi, Pakistan. Now, China's Belt and Road Initiative is, it's this neo-colonial effort on the part of Xi Jinping. He did not think it up. It's that, the secretive Chinese Machiavelli, Wang Huning. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce his name, but it was his baby. He came up with the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative as a way that the CCP could pretty much survive until maybe it was able to, air quotes, reunite with Taiwan so that it could have access to the South China Sea and the shipping routes there. The Belt and Road Initiative has had some success, a lot of soft power success, although that is waning currently. But what most people don't understand is the enormous risk that China has been subjecting its workers to in these developing countries. Pakistan is supposed to be really the crown jewel of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Pakistani and China relations are supposed to be pretty tight, but I guess that's their propaganda, because there are certainly, and over the past couple of years, there's been some major cracks in the veneer of that relationship. Here you see something you didn't see much before. There have been attacks on Chinese nationals in Pakistan before. Most of the time, those nationals were construction workers, and they were actually inside this separatist region, or it's a region that's trying to separate from Pakistan, has a lot of, it's Baluchistan. So it's near that port that China is developing, and it's called Gwadar, Gwadar. China is trying its best to develop a port to access the Indian Ocean. And it just so happens that the people of that region don't want to be a part of Pakistan, and they don't want Beijing there. And so they've been fighting back. And they fight back with the only way that they know how. They target Chinese workers and civilians. But it was typically, I think, those attacks were located in that region. This is in Karachi, so this is near the gate of the Confucius Institute. It was 3 Chinese nationals and their driver near the gate of the Confucius Institute, the University of Karachi. So this is certainly an escalation of the attacks that were happening in Pakistan on Chinese nationals, and it's terrorism, of course, and it's meant to send a message, right? But I think people are overlooking, the difficulties, the challenges. There are a lot of experts that talk about the financial challenges, and we talk about the debt trap, right, a lot when we talk about the BRI. But what we don't talk about is the fact that China has significant opposition, maybe from minority communities, or even just the local community itself, because maybe they are just doing, backdoor deals with the government, and the government's corrupt, and that they don't necessarily have the support of the local communities. So there is a real danger there for anyone that Beijing sends over to try to, work on infrastructure and access that will go towards meeting Xi Jinping's geopolitical goals. So what's fascinating to me is that this is happening in Pakistan, but it's also happening in Afghanistan. There's some recent news where there were similar attacks on Chinese civilians in Afghanistan. After that, we see that Beijing is still having trouble in Europe, as Germany denies Volkswagen investment guarantees that it had been given pretty much most years when the Xinjiang police files were leaked by, I believe they were leaked by Adrian Zenz. Let's see, the Der Spiegel report. The Xinjiang police files were pretty dramatic. Oh, you know what it was? I remember now, sorry. Someone hacked into the system and exposed a cache of documents known as the Xinjiang police files, shedding new light on human rights abuses by the Chinese government here. DW has the story. And this was just, yeah, Adrian Zenz, I remember. He gave a little bit of a commentary about that. And he authenticated them. He said the files would be almost impossible to falsify. He received the cache from an anonymous source who hacked into official databases in Xinjiang. It's possible to fake documents, he said, but it's a lot harder to fake images. The images were just shocking. They were brutal. They were horrific. I think a lot of even the press were unwilling to show them. You may be able to I think the New York Times is showing some of the images. You may be able to see some there. But they were pretty awful. And so as that hit the press, right just before then, Volkswagen has a factory in Xinjiang, and Volkswagen had doubled down on, staying in Xinjiang because, they gave all this about contributing to the local economy, helping the Chinese people and this and that. But we can go into more detail later. But essentially, remember how I said that the Chinese government subsidizes foreigners for being in China, or it did until recently. Well, they're still heavily subsidizing, any company's presence in Xinjiang, because they're trying to develop Xinjiang. So I'm sure that that's part of the reason that there's possibly also an arrangement between Volkswagen and the Chinese government for market access. Okay, call it speculation, right? So I'm telling you that this is what I think it could be going on. I'm not telling you it's a fact, because these kinds of things would never be publicly admitted. But the Chinese government, as we all know, has been quite frank about its use of market access or denial of market access for companies that don't jump on board its political priorities. And so you might say that it is just as easily the case that, maybe Volkswagen's getting a subsidy, maybe they are just trying to hold on to market access. Who knows? But for whatever reason, they doubled down right before these Xinjiang police files came out. They even doubled down afterwards, and the German government was furious. It removed those investment guarantees that were sort of like subsidies to help the auto industry for Volkswagen because of this, to cover new China business because of their concerns over human rights violations in the Xinjiang region. And then later that month, we start to see the forced labor issue developing even more. After Germany denied the Volkswagen investment guarantees, a Xinjiang import ban that the U.S. had passed was becoming effective, and companies were really stressed out, Western and Chinese companies, with trying to comply with it and how it was impacting their business. You know, much of the world's solar panels come from Xinjiang. You've got the Xinjiang cotton, which is primarily the focus of the forced labor ban, or it was the original focus. After that, they expanded it to just all products coming out of Xinjiang. And I think I saw something the other day that since then, this is back in June, so 6 months ago, since then, it looks like exports from Xinjiang to the U.S. have decreased by something like 60% or 69% dramatically. So this was a real turning point in U.S.-China trade relations. It is not to say that these products are not coming into the U.S. markets. There have also been studies that show that, you know, these products get rerouted through partner countries. They might end up, cotton textile products from Xinjiang might end up in Bangladesh, or it could end up somewhere else, Vietnam, furniture or another product could end up somewhere else, and then it's exported from there to the U.S. So I'm pretty certain that American officials are aware of this. But this was a huge step towards addressing forced labor concerns. It also enormously impacted U.S.-China business. A report later that month found that U.S. home improvement giant Home Depot, if you have ever been to the U.S. or lived in the U.S., this is where you go when you want to, you know, remodel or fix something in your house. It's like the Brico stores here in Europe, right? So these are a huge big box, you know, franchise store all throughout the country. They have sourced their vinyl flooring products from forced labor. So this was a big deal for them. Then you start hearing rumors coming out of Washington that I'm laughing. Not all of this is deadly serious, right? I'm sorry if I sound. I can't even believe it. This is one reason I started this newsletter. I can't even wrap my mind around the developments that are happening at such a quick pace. This would have been unheard of, you know, even 2 years ago, or possibly even 1 year ago. But the relationship between the U.S. and China has plummeted to these kinds of depths. So you see here my headline that Wall Street is now, by the middle of 2022, caught between U.S. investment screening and Xi Jinping's Common Prosperity. So Xi Jinping's Common Prosperity program is reining in debt, and it's cracking down on some of China's most valuable tech companies, and also you know, houses. The motto, houses are for living in, not speculation. So he's attacking, you know, the bubble in the Chinese property market. But a lot of these industries are a focal point for U.S. investment. And so you've got the pressure of Xi's policies on one end, and then the U.S. is furious with Xi Jinping's geopolitical moves, and also his treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And so they are starting to at this time talk about U.S. investment screening, outbound investment screening. This is obviously just, you know, U.S. capital has been pretty much free to do what it wants once it leaves U.S. borders. And so this is an unbelievable. So in addition to terrifying Wall Street here, we've got China angered over this U.S. Taiwan policy that keeps edging ever so closely to a rejection of the one China policy that the U.S. has adhered to for many, many years, decades, I guess. So Biden has more than once in the news, as you may recall, let it slip publicly that the U.S. would defend Taiwan during a Chinese invasion. Then the White House would walk that back on each occasion. So I think the consensus of experts now is that really, yes, that Biden means what he says, and that, you know, Washington is just trying to do a little bit of damage control, but that he, in the event of an invasion, he would defend Taiwan. But who knows? You know, he hasn't. He has suggested several times, very strongly suggested as much, if not even said as much. So things are happening. All right. I wrote a thing again on some of my updates. Many of my updates, not all, but a lot of them I do leave open to public access, and the updates are shorter, more like opinions, like op-eds. Instead of just a reporting of the news, I will sort of put it all into context and try to explain what it means and what I think is really going on. So it's more subjective. You know, analysis is always a little bit subjective. You try to be as objective as you can, but the updates are usually a little bit more of my personal opinion based on my many years of watching China. I'm old and I've been studying China since university. I was a Chinese politics major in university at UCLA, so I've been fascinated for more than 2 decades with Chinese politics and Chinese modern history. I'm not an expert at all on ancient history, but Chinese modern history I know something about, and the political situation I know a lot about. So just based on what I know, how I understand the party, how I understand how Xi Jinping has been able to ascend to power in the party, and what I know about Xi Jinping himself is I think Beijing tries to mitigate the fallout on itself from Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but that doesn't mean that it's reevaluating the strategic partnership with Moscow. I don't see that it is at all. I don't see that it will unless Beijing's interests, direct interest, I'm not talking about, when I say Beijing's interest, I mean the interest of the Communist Party. I mean the survival of the Communist Party. If the survival of the Communist Party is at stake, then Xi Jinping's geopolitical ambitions, you know, are thrown out the door. But until that happens, they are firmly set on national rejuvenation. National rejuvenation, from their perspective, requires a great degree of geopolitical influence. They can't do it without a presence, maybe even dominating the South China Sea. They can't do it without a great deal of control and influence over third countries, whether those are in the developing world or the developed world. They can't achieve what they're trying to achieve without it. So Moscow is part of that plan, like it or not. And if Putin's actions somehow reverberate back to really threaten the CCP's own existence, only then, I think, will Xi abandon Putin, or if Xi is replaced by some less ambitious leader, possibly. But Xi Jinping is not really the cause of all this drama with China. People like to make him to be the villain, and he is a bit of a villain, I agree, but it's not him. He got to be leader of the party for a reason. There were elements of the party that decided that they were under threat and they needed to take back control. And Xi Jinping was hired as the man to do that for them. So this is a party problem. This is not a Xi Jinping. It is a Xi Jinping problem, yes, but it is just as much a party problem, a regime problem, unfortunately. I wish I could say otherwise, but it's pretty much, in my opinion, a regime problem. And no, they're not reevaluating their close ties at this point in time with Moscow. Maybe in the future, don't know. Towards the end of the month, we see a survey come out. I think this was probably an EU Chamber of Commerce in China survey that says that the number of European firms thinking of leaving China more than doubled since February the same year, within 6 months. So that tells you that things are tough for businesses, not only American businesses, but European businesses as well in China, mostly because of the COVID-0 issues. But I think before then, a number of these firms were wondering if China was really the place for them. So there are so many. Again, it's a calculation based on what industry you're in. It's complex, you know. It's hard for. That's why you see so many things in the news that make it seem that seem to contradict each other, because some journalists are speaking about firms leaving, you know, and these are tech firms. But even inside the tech industry, there's a wide range of tech firms. So each industry and subsets of that industry has their own interests and their own markets, and it depends. But China seems to be the universe for everybody in terms of business, but really, the only reason that seems to be the case is A, Chinese propaganda, because it wants people to believe that it's the universe of the world. B, the subsidies, the draw of the and if they didn't give you subsidies, they promised you, you know, gold when you cracked the China market, you know. Well, people got there and realized cracking the China market was a little bit harder than they expected, because they have local competition. And if they don't have it, they have it very soon. Once the locals catch on, they go and start their own businesses, and then they are locals, and they can lobby, might not be the right word, but use their dollars to influence local governments to allow only their firm to succeed and kick those foreigners out. They don't want competition. And there's a, you know, so China is not the easiest place to do business, and a lot of people will tell you that. But it was a place that drew a lot of firms. And once those firms got there and found the reality of the situation, some tried to stay because they still had some, what I call China gold rush fever. Some were actually still profiting from their sales inside China or from manufacturing components inside China, and others were not. And those were the ones that were trying to decide what to do, if it was worth staying. Would they be able to turn things around in the future? Would they not? And COVID-0 just sort of answered that question for them, for those firms. And so they started really dropping like flies, so to speak, or, you know, they were leaving in an accelerated rate. By July, we see that the US-China tech war is intensifying. We see the US pressing a number of allied countries like the Netherlands to expand an American ban on chip tech sales to China. The Netherlands has a national champ for semiconductor equipment. I think they do the lithographic machinery. It's ASML is the name of the company, and they are the only one in the world that does what they do. And they can sell, you know, the advanced equipment to China, or they can not sell the advanced equipment to China. And the US is trying to persuade them not to sell the advanced equipment to China. So, of course, they want to be able to sell. There's pushback, there's controversy. At this point in time, I think they had tentatively agreed. I think even now they still agree, but there's even a few weeks back in the news, there was some words coming out of, The Hague, the capital, where the minister was saying that we have to do what's best for the Netherlands, not what's best for the U.S., and our economic interests take priority over, the U.S. National security interests, that sort of thing. So I still think they're on board, but it's a little shaky. They may not be 100% on board, but it feels to me like they are on board. There was some news that said that they did come to an agreement. The same thing has been happening in Japan. Japan has its own semiconductor industry, and a similar controversy has been brewing there with the U.S. ban on the chips. But it seems to me the last thing I saw, and I think I might have covered it in my newsletter, and as we get closer to the current date, you might see it. I think that both Japan and the Netherlands is currently on board with the U.S. position. We also finally see Shimao defaulting, which again I explained to you was just this unbelievable sign that not all is well in the Middle Kingdom. It's kind of terrifying, if you ask me. Then the former Prime Minister of Japan, Abe, was assassinated, and there were some mixed reactions in China. There were some nationalists who celebrated it. It was awful. And state media might have given them a platform to do so. So that was not nice. Let's see. All right, here's something that I wrote in July that might interest you. I found it interesting. It's not super surprising, but I'm glad that it's not like this hasn't been done before. many times. But it's interesting for investors. I think they need to be reminded of these things and the potential for these things to happen. So the title of this update that I have on July 22nd is that foreign-owned fund managers were under new pressure to create the Communist Party cells in China. This is not locked. There's no little lock icon here, so you can read it freely if you are interested in knowing more. More problems with the BRI. A lot of those problems are debt related, because the governments that that Xi assigned BRI agreements with were already sort of struggling economically anyway, and then you add COVID pandemic to the mix, and it just exacerbated their economic situation, and they start defaulting on their debt. So these PRC BRI investments, 9 times out of 10 they are just financing they're financing the infrastructure on terms, well, the terms are interesting, but they're financing infrastructure where no one else will in many cases. And the reason no one else will finance the infrastructure is because that government has a very long history of defaulting on its IMF, World Bank loans or what have you. So they were already risky loans, risky investments to begin with, but hey, it's government money. This is how China works, right? So now China is having a debt crisis outside of China with the BRI investments, because they are faltering. And I think this is a headline from Financial Times. It was a fabulous story. If you're interested, I'll send it to you. where the analyst out of Financial Times literally calls it the PRC's first overseas debt crisis. But it is a bad problem for them.